on September 7, 1940, 348 German bombers crossed a canal to bombard London City. The mental premise of all the commanders who planned this attack was that the order of the City of London would be disturbed by the bombardment and chaos would cover the entire city. This day is called Black Saturday. More than 80,000 bombs were dropped only on the City of London. About 1 million buildings in England were damaged or completely destroyed, and more than 40,000 British people lost their lives. But the question is, did the city go into chaos? Did they act brutally because of fear? What we have been told about our nature is that we're infinitely evil creatures, that we have drawn a thin layer of civilization over our wicked behaviors, and when a crisis happens, this thin shell will break. Then our wicked behaviors will be revealed and human will become a wolf to other humans. But the interesting thing that happened after the bombardment in London was that the people of the city didn't show emotional behavior and out of human civilization. Incidentally, this was one of the shining moments in England's history when people stood united to help each other. Field reports show that even many shopkeepers mocked this bombardment. Some stores put a sign in front of the door that said, "More open than ever," because the walls of the store were destroyed. Not only did the city not fall into chaos, but people showed more humanity and empathy. In response to these attacks, Churchill, with the mentality that chaos and disorder will cover the German cities, ordered the bombardment of German residential cities. There was a heavy bombardment on German cities, which was even more intense than the explosions in London. Half of the cities and towns of Germany were destroyed, and most parts of Germany were turned into burnt ruins. But what was strange, contrary to all expectations, no sign of collective madness was observed. The neighbors helping each other was amazing. Churchill, Hitler, Roosevelt, and all those in power at that time thought that human civilization was only a thin shell. They were confident that the aerial bombardment would crack this thin and fragile shell. But with more bombardment, this crust became even thicker and the people became more united. The question we seek to answer in this episode is, can we find hopeful points in human history? Is the image that we have about our nature due to the influence of big media and news based on correct assumptions? And the more important question is, if we believe that the human race and nature is evil, who people benefits the most? Who strongly propagates this belief and instills in us that we humans can't trust each other, and only with the presence of the powerful and politicians will the society remain a society? Who people benefits more from this hypothesis and default? The title of the 5th episode of the Elixir of Awareness channel is A Hopeful History. We want to explore the history of mankind and our ancestors in a way that the mass media didn't never tell us anything about it. So please watch this episode without any preconceived notions. This episode is made up of stories and facts as well as scientific research that can change our view of the world, society, and ourselves. And with this awareness, and with this change of perspective, our power to influence society will increase a lot. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Elixir of Awareness channel. In these days that we're preparing this episode, a very painful thing has happened. Unfortunately, a huge earthquake has happened in Turkey and Syria. About 50,000 people have lost their lives. Snowfall and sub-zero temperatures have also made the relief work very difficult. The depth of this human tragedy is very painful. The people of many different countries, regardless of their political and religious beliefs, helped the earthquake-stricken people of these two countries in different ways. Many voluntarily traveled to the earthquake-affected areas, and many others gave their help in the form of money, warm clothes, heating devices, groceries, and food. The topic of this episode of ours is very related to what happened after the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. Condolences to all the survivors of this painful human tragedy. With great respect, we dedicate this episode to all the survivors of this tragic incident. May their souls be happy, and may their memory be cherished. The concept that we want to talk about is a very important issue that can transform society. And if we understand it well, it's like a medicine that changes our thinking. And it guarantees that you can watch the world from another angle. If we want to summarize this idea in one line, we have to say, we aren't angels that fell from heaven. And of course, we aren't the monsters that the media and those in power want to instill in us. We are human, and we have humanity, and in this humanity, some potentials can make the world better than it's today. In the summer of 1999, in a small school located in Belgium, 9 children were infected with a mysterious disease. They went to school that morning without any special symptoms, and after lunch they all got sick. Headache, nausea, palpitations. Teachers and officials who were looking for the origin of this disease were thinking of only one thing: Coca-Cola drinks. Those children had drunk Coca-Cola together during their leisure time. It didn't take long for the news of the possible toxicity of Coca-Cola to spread quickly on all television channels and newspapers. The Coca-Cola company issued a statement the same day, announcing that millions of Coca-Cola bottles would be collected from stores across Belgium. But it was too late, and the symptoms of the disease had spread throughout Belgium and had even reached France by crossing the border. Several sick children with common symptoms were taken to hospitals by ambulance. The company had to collect 17 million bottles of Coca-Cola in Belgium and also destroy all the stock in the warehouse. A few weeks later, something strange happened. Toxicology experts and doctors published their reports. What do you think they found out by experimenting on Coca-Cola bottles? Nothing. They weren't poisonous. There weren't toxic agents in those Coca-Cola drinks. One of the researchers said there was no doubt that those children were sick and had common symptoms, but it was not because of drinking Coca-Cola. We told this story to talk to you about the effect of prediction. When we believe something will make us sick, it really does. Hundreds of children throughout Belgium were infected with this false assumption. That is to say, they were delusional. This doesn't mean that they were lying and pretending, because more than thousands of children were really sick with similar symptoms. But the cause of their illness wasn't drinking Coca-Cola. You may have noticed little by little what conclusion we want to reach. We want to say that our view of ourselves as human beings can be affected by these wrong assumptions. These wrong assumptions make us behave badly. Actually, that our mentality is negative about other people strangely makes them also behave negatively. If we want to deal properly with the biggest challenges of our society, we must start from the root causes. It seems that we have to re-examine our view of human nature. As an explanation, we must say that this episode of the Elixir of Awareness channel wasn't prepared with the naive assumption that we humans are completely good and innocent. Definitely we aren't angels. We're very complex beings with good qualities, not so good qualities, and also very bad qualities. But what we want to talk about is that our image isn't a beautiful image under the influence of the media, news, and recommendations of powerful people and politicians in society. And the main reason that in today's world, unity and empathy are difficult to form in crises is our negative view towards ourselves and the nature of human beings. You know we're evolutionarily more sensitive to negative news than positive news. It means throughout human history, the things that produced danger were more important to us. Too much fear didn't cause death, but too little fear often did. We're the children of those who paid a lot of attention to the news and negative events around us. Pessimism was a weapon for survival. Now this human carries cynicism as a weapon and lives in a world where they're constantly told by the media and the powers that others are untrustworthy. Terrible stories such as plane hijacking, murder, robbery, child abduction, and all such news make us come to the disappointing conclusion that human is an unreliable monster. We aren't rational enough to face the news. Mentally, we tend to absorb negative news, and this issue can make us imprisoned in a prison of fixed beliefs. We want to talk about these defaults in this episode. And the main source that we used to prepare this episode is a brilliant book entitled Humankind, A Hopeful History, written by Mr. Rutger Bregman, a Dutch historian who graduated from UCL University and was published in 2020. And what we're talking about in this episode is taken from the stories, contents, and facts of this book. Almost all different sciences show us a negative image of human beings. Look at economic science. The basic core of economics and its view of humans is that humans are something like selfish and calculating robots. An important issue that economics emphasizes is the issue of competition. That humans compete with each other for newer and better achievements. But there's a question of whether the main core of humans' life development was really the issue of competition. Because when we look at evolution, we find that it isn't. The main feature that has made us human beings into the best creatures is neither competition nor killing each other, but the feature of cooperation. We humans are neither stronger nor smarter nor faster than other creatures on this planet. We have one characteristic that amazingly separates us from the rest of the creatures on this planet, and that's the ability to work together. You may say to yourself, well, other creatures also have very strong and precise cooperation, such as the colony of ants and termites. But there's an important point that maybe insects cooperate more precisely than us. But actually they only play their role. If an ant is a worker, it only plays its role and can't be anything else. In a given framework, the worker ant does only what its genes tell it to do and has no other choice. But we humans are creatures that can think, make change, and act creatively outside the framework defined for us. Together we can advance science, build tools, cooperate, and expand human civilization with the power of imagination and the knowledge that we gain. We mean that the science of economics says that the basis of human progress was the issue of competition. And probably in this competition to get better and more things, some values have been neglected. But biology says something else. If we humans were able to conquer this planet as a powerful species, it wasn't because of powerful teeth, not because of high physical strength, but because of our strange and unique ability to cooperate with each other. And the important question that we'll point out the answer to in the following is, what qualities do we need to have for this cooperation to be able to change the world with each other's help? We mean things like generosity, honesty, courage, and a lot of good traits, and of course not so good traits like jealousy or greed, which we'll talk about. Cooperation is a very important issue for human development, something that economics has almost completely forgotten. On the other hand, the same negative image is instilled in us by other big institutions in society, such as political or military powers. And the main point is that believing this image and negative mentality that we ordinary people are very dangerous and unreliable people, it's very beneficial for them. Because in this case we give them a part of our facilities, our freedom, and our humanity, so that they always watch over us, so that we don't tear each other into pieces and eat each other. Imagine a teacher who constantly punishes the students in the class and disrespects them, because they wants to tell the students that you're dangerous and that if I'm not there, the safety and order of the class will be endangered. What we believe about ourselves aren't only has a direct effect on our daily behaviors and interactions, but also has a direct effect on increasing the power and authority of the institutions that surround us and benefit from our negative mindset. During the darkness of the church government in the Middle Ages, it was a sentence that priests often repeated to common people. And that sentence was that no human being is exempt from sin. Even a baby whose life is only one day is born a sinner. The basic idea in the Middle Ages was this inherent sin that humans suffered from. The sin was connected to the story of the forbidden fruit that Adam and Eve ate, and the weight of this sin was on our shoulders. And now the church was here with all the coherent and powerful institutions to help us sinful and violent people not to hurt each other. But the important question is that if the shell of civilization is split and we aren't treated badly and we're left to ourselves a little more, will we still be cruel and violent and untrustworthy monsters? The interesting thing is that most of the people in power who talk about the negative image of human nature are called realistic people. And anyone who tried to talk about the positive and good side of human nature, they call naive. We know. We aren't absolutely good, but we want to say that it's important to defend the relative goodness of humans. But in today's world, defending the relative goodness of humans means taking a stand against those in power. In their opinion, a hopeful view of human nature is considered threatening for them. Rebellion and riot. This is the desired image of our nature that the people in power want us to believe. But the time has come for a new realism towards ourselves, society, and human nature. A novel that has a very dark atmosphere is a novel called Lord of the Flies, written by William Golding. The main idea of this novel is about some boys who are stuck on an island, and it mentions how people behave when law and civilization are destroyed. Millions of copies of Lord of the Flies are sold and translated into more than 30 languages, and it's called one of the most realistic literary works. The main idea of this novel is that man produces pure evil like a bee produces honey. The story is about some boys who become dangerous animals after getting stuck on an unknown island. The story of the novel also ends like this. One day a ship finds them by chance. While 3 of them were killed, all the nature of the island has been destroyed. Every what's on fire and everything is destroyed. But in the notes later published by Mr. William Golding, some interesting things were revealed. And after reading those notes, we realized how sad Mr. William Golding, the author of this novel, was. The famous sentence that he has always repeated in interviews with the media is that I always understood the Nazis because my nature is also like them. Did you hear these things about the bitter and dark novel Lord of the Flies? But the point is that we have a real story in front of this novel that we're sure most of you probably haven't heard anything about. Because hearing that doesn't help those people in power and is considered a threat to them. 6 boys on a remote island and in danger of death, with the same story and the same conditions, but with a different and real ending. The true story of Lord of the Flies takes place around Australia in June 1965. 6 boys take a boat at night to have fun and go to the sea. After they sleep and wake up, they wander in the sea for 8 days. And then a miracle happened. Yes, an island that has no inhabitants. Those 6 boys reach the island and live alone on this island for about a year. Strange things happen, they get injured, and even one of them breaks his leg. But the question is, did the same thing happen that was mentioned in William Golding's novel? The answer is no. When a boat happened to reach that island on Sunday, September 11th, 1966, they encountered a different scene. All the boys were in perfect health, the one with a broken leg had been taken care of, and a cooperative division of labor and a perfect coexistence had taken place. After that incident, those 6 boys became each other's closest friends until the end of their lives. We want to say it's time to tell another kind of story about which we have real evidence. Lord of the Flies is a true story that shows us how much stronger we can be if we can rely on each other. And of course it proves that when a crisis occurs, how we become our closest allies, not cruel monsters. The real Lord of the Flies is a story of friendship, loyalty, and empathy. Edward said, who is a very important thinker and philosopher, believed the image that the Westerners presented to the world when they first encountered the colonized nation and culture was. They're violent, lying, and mean people. Edward said in all the colonized cultures of that time find a similar and hidden trace that ends in the belief that those societies under colonialism don't have the authority to manage their affairs and be independent. Let's ask ourselves again. Who persons benefit more if we have a negative mindset about ourselves? If we want to examine this issue much deeper, we should go to 2 important philosophers in human history. It seems that our mental world was formed under the influence of the theory of one of these 2 philosophers. One of these philosophers is Thomas Hobbes, and the other philosopher who is his critic is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We want to examine the theories of Hobbes and Rousseau to find the deep and fundamental reasons for the debate. Hobbes has a book titled Leviathan. The name of the book is derived from the name of a legendary sea giant, which we'll talk about in the following about its connection with Hobbes's philosophy. To explain his argument, Hobbes first imagines a natural state of human life. That is to say, thousands of years ago when there was no civilization and we were cave dwellers and hunters. Hobbes assumes a very dark and pessimistic state of mankind. And he believed that in the situation of that time, the human was a wolf for another human. He believed that in the past, humans were very cruel and violent. He guessed that at that time people were tearing each other to pieces, there was a lot of killing and looting, and violence was a natural part of human life. Then he imagines and guesses that humans created a giant named Leviathan, because they were tired of the existing conditions. This Leviathan is a metaphor for the same government. Then those people formed a government and gave high ranks to some people and told the government that we'll give you our freedom and energy, and in return, you provide our security. That is to say, we give up our rights, pay taxes, work for the government, and the government monopolizes many things, becomes powerful, builds an army and weapons, and in short, the government establishes order and security in a disorderly society. Actually, Hobbes believed that the main reason for the emergence of governments was that we humans need them to ensure our security. Because Hobbes considered human nature to be bad and believed that the human is a wolf to another human. He thought that if there were no governments, we humans would tear each other to pieces. But as we said, another philosopher named Jean-Jacques Rousseau has a different opinion. When Rousseau was born, 33 years had passed since Hobbes' death. On one side we had Hobbes, a pessimist who said that society could only control its wild instincts by building a Leviathan to rule over people, and he wanted us to believe in the evil nature of man. And on the other hand we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a man who said that there's goodness and humanity deep in the hearts of all people, and he also believed that Leviathan isn't only the way to salvation, rather it's the thing that destroys our society. Now, to better understand and examine these two mutual views, we must go back to 50,000 years. So let's take a short trip back in time. Hobbes believed that human life in that era was such that human was alone, violent, wild, and uncontrollable, and human life had a very terrible situation in general. In fact, according to Hobbes, 50,000 years ago there was a war of all against all. But Hobbes also assures us that we shouldn't worry, because he believed that chaos can be destroyed and peace can be established. Of course, on the condition that we agree to give our freedom to the government. But Rousseau had a different opinion. Rousseau believed that 50,000 years ago human was a noble savage. This phrase is very interesting. That is to say, Rousseau doesn't believe that human is all goodness. He recognizes the wild face, which is a part of human nature. But it also considers good human qualities. That's why he used the phrase noble savage. A savage who could cooperate and knew that if they harmed nature, they would eventually perish. The savage who respected the natural forces in nature and all living things on this planet, and this noble savage is the title Rousseau uses to describe man 50,000 years ago. But to know which of these two people is right, we have to examine the scientific evidence. We've to go to the skulls we found, and to the tribes that are somehow left untouched. For example, let's examine the tribes that encountered human civilization for the first time in the 15th and 16th centuries and see how their situation was. Were they violent and wild, or did they live in peace? In this way we can find clues to the truth. What we're sure about is that we're more advanced than all the creatures on this planet. But the question is, why us? Why did humans progress so much? Why the first astronaut was not a cow or a chimpanzee? Did you know that we're 60% genetically similar to bananas? Can you believe it? We are 80% similar to cows and 99% of our genes are similar to chimpanzees. And the question is, what's the 1% that made us so different and able to progress? Japanese researchers conducted an interesting experiment. In this experiment, they designed an experiment to compare humans with chimpanzees. The subjects were placed in front of a monitor, and a set of numbers from 1 to 9 was shown to them. Only a very short time the numbers were displayed, and then white squares were replaced instead of the numbers. And the subject had to use his memory power to guess the place of the numbers in order from small to large and press the white squares. The point is, when the researchers increased the speed of the experiment and the numbers changed faster, the chimpanzees performed much faster and better than us humans. The smartest subject was a chimp named Ayumu, whose video you can see on the internet. She was faster than all the subjects and had fewer mistakes. But why did we mention this experiment? Because we want to say that this mentality that we're smarter or faster than all the creatures on this planet is a false premise. What we're amazingly better at than all other creatures is the creation of social relationships and the power of cooperation, as well as creating semantic systems. Let's talk a little more about semantic systems. We were able to create a concept called money that all around 8 billion people in the world believe in. What's just a piece of paper has caused all the cooperation and plans of the entire people of the world to be formed. Or, for example, digital currencies and the blockchain system. That all transactions in a public web space are visible to all the people of the network, and the people of the network themselves confirm the security and authenticity of the transactions, or even passport. These are examples of semantic systems. One of the reasons why chimpanzees haven't sent astronauts to space is because they're unable to create these semantic systems. Also, we're geniuses whose our main genius is shaping social relationships. And to form these social relations, we needed to create trust between each other. Let's tell you something interesting. We're the first species in the primate group that part of our eyes is white. This is a unique feature that allows us to recognize each other's gaze direction. Another primate group, which is about 200 species, produce melanin in their eyes, and this substance produces color in their eyes. That is to say, the rest of the primates are like gamblers who put on glasses and the direction of their gaze can't be recognized. But the unusual eyes of us humans make the direction of our gaze and our feelings visible. In fact, our honesty or lying is clear from our eyes. And this feature has made us lie to each other as little as possible and abuse each other as little as possible. We emphasize, as much as possible. This feature isn't our weakness, rather it's our superpower. Because with its help we can understand each other and cooperate. To make this clearer, we want you to imagine two groups on the same planet. One of them is the tribe of geniuses, people who are unique and have very high mental qualities and many intellectual advantages. But neither do they like to teach each other anything, nor are others interested in learning in that tribe. On the other hand, there's another tribe in which there are beings with average intelligence. But with the difference that, unlike the first tribe, they love communication and being together, and also strangely learning from each other. Now, in your opinion, if we leave these two tribes alone to grow separately, which tribe will gain superiority? The answer is clear, definitely the second tribe. We humans are members of the second tribe, even though we're weaker than other creatures in many other things. For example, whales can produce a signal that can be heard by another whale up to 4 kilometers away, or without having internet. Or if you examine the orientation system of a bat, we'll reach a complexity that's beyond our mental understanding, and many other examples. But we humans are beings with physical and mental abilities that may not all be the best, but we have a series of special features. For example, we can talk to each other and invent languages as semantic systems. We can cooperate and make covenants and unite. And these are what made us the best creatures on this planet. Now you may ask, despite all the evidence based on the relative goodness of man, what convincing answer is there for all the wars, bloodshed, and massacres throughout history? As we said before, we aren't going to be naive and not see these things. We humans have another dark side. Sometimes humans do terrible things that can't be seen about any other animal. Canaries never build a prison. Crocodiles don't make gas chambers. And throughout history, no koala has decided to burn its own kind alive in a fire. These are terrible things that only we humans have done. But here is the question. How can the reasons for this black history be analyzed? We want you to listen to this sentence carefully. The very thing that made us the kindest creatures on this planet can turn us into the cruelest creatures on this planet. We are social animals, but we have one characteristic or perhaps an important flaw. We feel the closest to those who are similar to us. It seems that this instinct is part of our DNA. Here we're going to talk about a hormone called oxytocin, known as the love hormone. In addition to strengthening interest in friends, oxytocin produces trust in them. But it has a negative side. As much as this hormone makes us interested, attached, and committed to familiar people around us, on the other hand, it produces disgust and hatred towards strangers. Actually, oxytocin is a well-known hormone that makes us closer to people similar to ourselves and our race, and as a result, separates us from people who aren't like us. Empathy is our most important characteristic, weapon, and virtue, and on the other hand, this empathy is the worst and most destructive aspect of our existence. This is a very amazing idea. Keep this idea in the back of your mind, because we'll come back to this topic later. Because we want to follow the main line of the discussion. We want to talk about what evidence there's that, despite that dark and pessimistic history, proves that human nature is more inclined towards goodness than evil. A concept exists in the world's armies called the firing ratio, which has been the subject of attention of military commanders and generals for years. The shooting ratio means how many times a soldier uses his gun in a face-to-face battle and how much he shoots. For example, in World War II, they checked the soldiers' guns after the battle and found that only 15 to 25% of the guns had been fired. Of course, in the same 15 to 20% of the guns used, deliberate error in firing should also be taken into account. The result is that the normal, healthy person has an internal, usually unknown, resistance to killing his fellow man. In fact, this characteristic is part of the emotional structure of all human beings. For example, in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, they realized that 90% of the guns had not been fired despite being reloaded. But the matter becomes even more strange. They realized that about 12,000 guns were reloaded twice, and half of them were more than 3 times, and even one gun had 23 bullets in it, and this is unbelievable. But why should a gun be loaded 23 times and not fired? Because when a general is standing over you as a commander, your only justification for not shooting is pretending to load your gun. It means that a soldier who has loaded his gun 23 times only pretended to be ready to shoot but didn't shoot. Loading the gun was the best excuse not to shoot. The firing ratio is one of the most important problems of armies in the world, and to solve this problem, generals do strange things. For example, instead of a circle mark in the target, they use a human face so that the shooter gets used to it and can shoot a human in real conditions. Or they use remote control weapons such as bombs so that when a soldier presses the fire button not see the victims. The biggest killing in the Second World War means 95% was done by bombs. When the bomb is used, humans aren't seen as our fellow humans but as a small spot on the earth. Like the drones that fly and target the victim and the soldier who never sees the face of the victim. Because if they seize the victim directly, the shot is likely to be very low, even if they're enemies of each other. We conclude that if the nature of us humans was evil, this firing ratio should have been different. If we humans had an enthusiasm for killing each other, we should have seen many examples around us. Yes, we may see a woman kidnapped and tortured by a murderer in a movie and then cut to pieces. But once we think deeply, how many of us or the people we know can really even think of doing these terrible things? If we see a person in danger, don't we do everything to save them? So for what purposes are the narratives published by the media about us and saying that we people have an inherent evil in us? And the more important question is who benefits the most from this issue? Analysis of history tells us that violence isn't actually hereditary. Violence happens, but it doesn't last long and it's by no means easy. Look at the anatomy of our body. If we have been designed for hundreds of thousands of years to kill each other and be evil, then why are there no signs of violence in the details of our body anatomy, such as nails and our teeth? Why is there no evidence of this fundamental and internal desire in our bodies? Why are we not like killing machines? If there's evolution, and if the main nature of human beings is evil, violence, and killing, then why it has not affected our physical anatomy? If Hobbes is right, we should enjoy killing each other. But do we really enjoy this work? Please leave those very few psychopaths aside and think about the normal public people. Out of about 8 billion people on this planet, Do many of us enjoy killing each other, even killing animals and other living creatures? I know it seems a bit strange to hear these things in today's world. Some of you may say that these things are very optimistic and closer to the illusion. And you may say, look at society, at the statistics of murder and rape, threats and violence. So what about all the books we read about major wars throughout human history? What's the explanation for mass graves and genocides? And we want to say, definitely we'll explain it in detail, so please stay with us until the end. We want to explain where the story started, and how that peaceful human turned into a violent monster, and what influencing factors exist. One choice is we could say absolutely that human is a producer of violence and evil, and this is institutionalized in human nature. But another view is that human has a good nature, but they has also done bad deeds, and the main question here is, what are the reasons for those deeds? Why do wars and murders happen? And why do good people do bad things? And when we know the reasons for these issues, then we can recognize them and even correct them. Let's examine another interesting fact. When we examine the paintings left over from the time of cave dwelling, if Hobbes is right, we should expect to see evidence of war and violence in these paintings. We should expect that the person who drew these paintings must have left pictures of murder and violence. But this isn't the case at all, even though there are thousands of paintings left from the time before agriculture. But most of the paintings are about ceremonies or buffalo hunting or praise of nature. There isn't a single example of paintings before the agricultural era that shows evidence of human wars with each other. But the story starts from here, right after the agricultural era and exactly from the era of settlement. Paintings are suddenly discovered in which there are pieces of evidence of violence. There are paintings of people killing each other with sharp objects like spears and slingshots, and in most of those paintings, the state of human war with each other is gradually revealed. What's the matter? What changes did the agricultural revolution bring about in human history that turned us into such creatures? To break the shell of this issue and go into the depth of the story. One solution is to examine the tribes or societies that we've recently found in modern times. For example, Native Americans. When Christopher Columbus and other groups first reached the American continent and attempted to conquer this continent, they encountered Indian tribes. The tribes that seem to be frozen in the era before the agricultural revolution. So they're very good subjects to study. In 1492, when a traveler arrived on the coast of the Bahamas in America, he recorded his information about the native inhabitants of that area as follows. He wrote that they don't have weapons in their hands and aren't familiar with weapons, and when I showed them the sword, they cut their hands due to a lack of knowledge. By seeing this situation, the traveler thought that they would be good servants. He thought that with 50 people we can arrest all these people and force them to do whatever we want. This passenger was Mr. Christopher Columbus. He didn't waste time and came back a year later with 17 ships containing 1,500 people and started killing and trading slaves there. Please forget the image that Hollywood and Western movies have of Native Americans who sing on the back of horses and easily kill people. The narrative that was recorded by the first invaders to the American land is about meeting with extremely peaceful, kind, and generous people. And of course, when you rob their tribes and families, they will take countermeasures. But this feature isn't part of their existence. Christopher Columbus slaughtered 99% of the members of a tribe called the Carib. And only 1% survived to satisfy the soldiers' sexual needs. This story of our encounter with pristine and peace-loving tribes in which goodness has been seen is a repeated story, and has been seen many times in other parts of the world, such as the Pacific Ocean and various islands. But to understand the depth of the matter, we must go back to 15,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. After the end of the ice age, the climate changed in different parts of the world. The weather warmed, and the area between the Nile in the west and the Tigris in the east became a wonderland. This means very fertile soil, lots of food, and people could harvest a lot with very little work and keep those crops for themselves. In fact, this is where the concept of ownership first took shape in the societies we know. This was the place where inequality grew, class differences were created, and the story took a different path right from here. Just when we started to settle together, we started to build a fence around our lands and said, "This is my land." And we started to protect it, and the concept of ownership is formed, and little by little we made the first military adaptations. And it's precisely from that era that little by little paintings of conflict and violence between humans are found. And this is the point where the human went from cosmopolitanism to xenophobia. Mr. Yuval Noah Harari, in his book titled Sapiens, proposes a very strange and brilliant idea. Mr. Harari says that we didn't tame the wheat, rather the wheat tamed us. It means that after we settled together and tamed a series of animals and started planting wheat, we thought that it was us who tamed the wheat, but it was the wheat that tamed us. We became captives of this wheat, and as if by eating the first wheat we migrated from heaven to a world full of competition and suffering. The appearance of these settlements started a new era in human history. It was here that the 1% began to rule over the 99% of the people. The days of freedom and equality were over. Suddenly, all kinds of diseases appeared. We got measles from cows. Influenza is the result of a microscopic three-way combination between humans, pigs, and ducks, and we fell into the trap of strange diseases and various viruses. This trap was the fertile land that showed itself after the end of the Ice Age, just when crops were growing without much effort. We continued this process for years until those lands were no longer fertile and couldn't be harvested. It was at that time that, due to the large volume of work and the shape of our bones, we no longer could work. We would redouble our efforts. But it was too late to return to the pre-agricultural golden age. Formed societies had new needs. The population was increasing and sedentary life had become a natural part of our existence. And until today, we're still affected by the decision that our ancestors made due to climate change. Interestingly, the same things that we refer to today as the milestones of civilization. For example, the invention of money, the invention of writing, or the birth of legal institutions were tools of oppression in the beginning. Consider the first coins. We didn't start making them to make our lives easier. The main reason was that the kings wanted to have an efficient way to collect taxes, or the invention of writing was not to express romantic feelings in the form of text or to write poems, rather it was for writing the names of slaves and the financial accounts of the new rulers in the society. Perhaps the best way to describe this situation is the Great Wall of China. One of the great wonders of the world, one of the uses of which they said was to keep dangerous wild barbarians away. But it became the largest open-air prison in history. The walls of China were built to prevent barbarians from invading the country of China, but inside the walls, the government committed the most brutal acts against the citizens. You may ask if civilization is bad at all. No, absolutely it's not. We are always in favor of the growth of awareness and the advancement of technology. But we're just trying to see the matter from a distance. Of course, civilization has given us many good things like the advancement of science and many other things. But what's important, and you should pay attention to, it's that all these developments we're talking about are a very new and very late phenomenon. At least 3/4 of the world's population lived in slavery to a rich master until 1800. 1800 means only 220 years ago. More than 90% of the population was agricultural land, and more than 80% were suffering from extreme poverty until recently. To better understand human civilization and the path it has taken, let us give an example. Imagine the whole history of mankind from the beginning until now is only 24 hours. That is, convert the whole date into one day. The first 23 hours and 45 minutes are absolute pain. That is to say, when you go back in your imagination to a quarter of an hour ago, all the events in our history are close to disaster. And this disaster starts after the agricultural revolution and continue until almost a few hundred years ago. All the achievements of civilization that we're witnessing today, such as the progress of science and technology, happened not in the last 15 minutes, but only in the last 2 minutes. The invention of the internet, the invention of advanced tools, the discovery of vaccines, going to the moon and discovering other planets, and many other things slowly emerged from 1950 onwards. If we want to evaluate the decision our ancestors made, we need to see the whole path, not just the results of this decision. There's no doubt about the progress of the last decade, but at the same time, many crises are also showing themselves. The crises that threaten our future mean that they may destroy us and all living things on this planet. Our planet is warming, species are becoming extinct, and nuclear and biological warfare threatens millions of people. And the important question is, how sustainable is this civilized way of life? And the only answer is that it's still too early to answer this question. It's still too early to tell what will happen to this planet and all its living beings after the atomic and biological wars. We can't describe and judge the entire human civilization only with the scale of the last 2 minutes of a day. Let's go back to the question we asked at the beginning of this episode. What's the explanation for all that violence, such as massacres, genocide, death camps, torture chambers, and mass killing pits? We address this issue with a very interesting story. In early 1944, a mystery remained unanswered for scientists. And that secret was this: why did the German soldiers were fighting with that stubbornness and authority? Many psychologists believed that the only effective factor that made German soldiers fight better than others was ideology. The fact that German soldier believed that he was standing on the correct side of history, his national and political belief was right, and this was the reason for his superiority over the rest of the soldiers. But psychologists gradually realized that they were completely wrong. With the interviews they conducted with the German prisoners and, of course, the secret listening devices they placed in the camps of the German soldiers, they found out something important. Many German soldiers who fought on the front line didn't know much about the ideology ruling Germany. That is to say, the German soldier loves Hitler, but doesn't know what is his ideology and ideals of National Socialism, why Hitler wanted to kill the Jews, and in general they didn't know much about these details. They were just fighting over a simple thing: feeling empathy. Not for the purposes of the Third Reich. Yes, you heard it right, empathy. Because they felt friendship and sympathy towards each other too much. All those ideals and ideologies belonged dozens of kilometers behind the front line of the war. Places such as army headquarters, ideological meetings, and think tanks. But in the face of danger, the soldiers fought with that strange force just because of friendship and empathy. Let's talk about another very interesting experiment. Children's Cognition Center at Yale University in America is known as Baby's Laboratory, and they conducted very interesting and amazing research. In this experiment, researchers perform a puppet show for a few months-old children. A show in which one doll behaves very friendly and kind and the other doll behaves disgustingly. It means good doll and bad doll. After the end of an episode, all the babies were shown the good and the bad doll, and naturally, all the babies chose the good and kind doll. But this experiment doesn't end here, it continues, and the wonderful point is here. In the next demonstration, the babies are shown that each of the dolls likes a certain food. One of them likes sweet and delicious foods like chocolate, which most babies like. And the other doll likes other food like beans, which babies aren't very interested in. The show is held again, and at the end of the show, they show the children both examples of kind and naughty dolls. And an amazing thing happens here. This time, unlike the first time, the babies chose a doll that liked their favorite delicious foods. It means naughty doll. While the naughty doll was the negative character of the show. That is to say, what the researchers realized was that babies prefer a doll that's bad-mannered but similar to them than a doll character that's kind but has a different opinion from them. Much other research shows that the way we perceive truth is directly related to our membership in a social group. That is to say, usually when we're members of a group, we recognize the collective belief as an absolute truth. The truth that has been formed because of friendship and empathy. And this issue makes us exclude the other people who don't think like our group from the circle of attention and humanity, and as a result we apply the most violence against them. This is our biggest personality problem. It's the most important bug in our emotional structure and the reason for many terrible happens. When genocide occurs or nuclear bombs are used, the main reason is our false confidence in the rightness of ourselves and the group we belong to. Another example to prove this is a research called The Tragic Story of Sherry Somers. In this experiment, Sherry Somers is a 10-year-old girl and a fictional character. The researchers tell the participants that the child has a fatal disease. And they're told that the baby girl is waiting for surgery and is getting late every day for her treatment. Researchers show participants a picture of that little girl and ask them to imagine themselves in that little girl's position. And then they try to establish a sense of empathy and emotional connection between the participants and the little girl. Of course, that little girl doesn't exist in reality, but the participants don't know. Here the experiment begins. Next, the researchers tell the participants that this little girl is waiting for an organ donation, but there are 10 other people on the waiting list before her, and they're the priority. And then they ask the participants, if you had the power to decide in this regard, would you put Sherry as the first priority for surgery? Actually, do you save her life? The majority of the participants in this experiment said yes and wanted Sherry to be the first priority. It was here that the researchers realized how effective the empathy factor is. Do you see? The basis of this moral choice is very shaky and weak because focusing on Sherry can lead to the death of people who have been waiting longer for surgery. It seems that empathy isn't like a sun that shines on everything equally, but like a spotlight that only focuses on certain things, and the rest aren't seen in the dark. Empathy is the factor that turns us into the kindest and cruelest creatures on this planet at the same time. The sad truth is that empathy and xenophobia are complementary, and both of them are the two sides of the same coin. Let's go back to the concept of the firing ratio. We said that all military armies try to increase the firing ratio among soldiers with different methods. But let's not forget that in the end, there's only one group that can prepare the soldiers to shoot their own kind from kilometers away from the front line of the war, and that's the generals. The great Iranian poet Ahmad Shamlu has a poem that clearly and beautifully refers to this issue in our era. He says,
"Upside-down era, in which the generals die without any minor damage and in the best way. But the men who hate war continue their lives with their chests split open and their skins smeared with hot lead. This is the whole story."
But now another mystery is slowly forming in your mind. Now that you're hearing these things, you might be thinking to yourself, if society is really full of such kind people, then why does it often bring narcissists and selfish people, opportunists and mental patients to the top of power? Why society usually makes wrong choices in electing leaders, and throughout history usually people rose to the top of power who harmed the peace and tranquility of society and the world with their bad decisions? How does power create corruption? This is the question that we want to answer. Let's examine an experiment that was done in 1998. In this laboratory, researchers randomly selected 3 people and assigned them a series of simple responsibilities in a room, like arranging the shelves and cleaning part of the room. And also one of them was chosen randomly as the leader of the group. A few hours later, they were given a plate with 4 biscuits in it, while the group was 3 people. And 1 more biscuit remains. Usually, in such cases, our behavior is such that no one eats the last biscuit due to respect and modesty, or we share it with others. But the point of the experiment was that the person who was chosen as the leader of the group ate the last biscuit more boldly. And this test was done many times in different ways, and more details were determined. For example, the person who was the leader of the group used to make the table dirty while eating. Maybe now most of you are imagining your boss at work. But we want to say that your boss didn't have this selfishness from the beginning, but it corrupts their position and power. In another interesting experiment that exists, two groups were allowed to drive in the city. One group with high model cars and another group with low model cars. 45% of people in the group who drove high model cars didn't stop for pedestrians and didn't follow the driving rules in detail. The more expensive the car and the higher the model, the more selfish and rude the driver was. All this research shows that people in power are initially very decent people, but their behavior usually changes after gaining power. We are usually very sensitive in empowering people in the field of moral virtues. For example, qualities such as generosity, justice, courage, kindness, and pragmatism are very important to us. But when these same people enter the center of power, the power gradually affects their minds and emotional structure. And after a while they seem to be very hasty, rude, selfish, careless, and proud. And this happens every time, even in small scales of power. And the conclusion that can be drawn from this research is to find out how this desire for power in a family or school or even a small company and finally in a society should be controlled and monitored to prevent disasters. Let's go back to the main topic of this episode, human nature. As we said, how we think about humans can influence the fate of society. In 1963, a psychologist named Bob Rosenthal conducted an interesting experiment at Cambridge University in London. He put some mice in two separate cages. And then he put two boards on top of these two cages. On one he writes smart mice and on the other he writes slow-minded mice. And then he explains to his students that these mice have to go through the maze and we group them according to their intelligence. The important thing is that all the mice were randomly selected, none were smarter or slower. Only students have been told that mice are divided into two groups, smart and slow-minded. The result of the experiment is surprising. The mice that the students believed to be more intelligent had a much better performance and speed. This is like magic. Even though the smart mice had no difference with the slow-minded mice, but their performance was twice as good in. There's no mysterious force involved, and there's only one logical explanation. What Rosenthal noticed was that his students behaved more warmly and gently when faced with intelligent mice because they expected more from them. And this encounter changed the behavior of mice and strengthened their performance. Apparently, intelligent mice, whose were petted more, rewarded more, and cared for more. Now, think about this question for a moment. If a teacher in the classroom has a special view of a group of his students, for example, if he considers some of the students to be smart and some of them to be lazy, does this look to have a direct effect on the actual performance of students? Does it affect their fate? The answer is yes. This is true because the same experiment was done in school and on humans and the results were similar. In some countries, the educational systems divide students into geniuses, normals, and slow minds from the very beginning through written exams and grades. But maybe with a different approach and look, positive changes will happen in their performance. The truth is that it's the same with human nature. If we've a negative view of human nature, it causes the same negative view to be realized in reality. The result of many events that happen in society is our negative perception of ourselves. Of course, the media played a very important role in creating this negative mentality. A person is like an antenna that constantly receives the wave of other people, and whether this wave is negative or positive is very important. If we make our view of human nature more positive and actually more realistic, experience shows that very positive things will happen. This is how we get from pessimism to realism, from the exclusion of some people from society to their presence and the use of their positive capabilities in society. Get from passivity to citizenship, from corruption to transparency, and from personal benefit to collective benefit and solidarity. And all these changes happen when we first accept the truth that we have verified with scientific evidence. The truth that says human nature is more inclined toward goodness. In the mid-1990s, Channel 4 TV in England made a new program. The name of the program was People's Parliament. In this program, they randomly used hundreds of ordinary participants with different educations and occupations. And then they wanted them to talk about important issues and problems such as drugs or arms trade, crimes, culture, and such issues. And in each part, they had to reach a final agreement together. The Economist magazine writes that according to the comments of most of the viewers of this program, the topics raised in this program had a higher quality and importance than the English House of Commons at that time. It means that the MPs didn't deal with these issues with such accuracy and quality at all. Unlike the members of the Parliament, the participants listened to each other calmly and argued with respect, and had a good and mutual reflection for the betterment of society. But what do you think Channel 4 did in England? They cancelled the program. The producers of the program thought that these discussions were too calm and logical, and of course lacked the flavor of politics and controversy. And from then on, they started broadcasting the Parliament sessions instead of that program. These events prove that the times when ordinary people come to the scene and their roles become colorful, very positive changes are happening in society. Changes that are mostly for the benefit of ordinary people and of course to the detriment of a limited and special few who are the main owners of power in the world. People voluntarily share many things without considering personal gain. Look at Wikipedia. No one gets paid to write, but it's the largest encyclopedia in human history. Look at the comments under the internet products. There you'll come across a lot of comments. Those who spend time without expectations and compassionately guided other people to buy those products. This is our true nature, where we give to others more than we keep to ourselves, and when we have a strange tendency to teach reflection and cooperation. This is something that modern civilization has completely forgotten. Another important point that we should know is that in societies where many of the basic needs of people, such as food, housing, and security, aren't well provided, these talks seem more like slogans. We know this. Research shows that in a society where the basic rights to live are impossible and the future is uncertain, instead of cooperation, people engage in a kind of competition which isn't beneficial to anyone. Yes, definitely infrastructure conditions are important. So if we want a peaceful society, if we want company, school, or a quiet family, the important point is that we must first provide those basic needs as much as possible, and then we can see the miracle of man and humanity and the effect of cooperation and empathy in society. Another important point for us to prevent the occurrence of disasters caused by the force of empathy is the issue of contact. What's meant is, how much are we in contact with people from different groups with mutual views towards us and competitors and those whose values aren't similar to our collective and individual values? How much are we in contact with people and groups who aren't like us and don't think like us? Also, many studies prove that the more contact we have with people who are against our opinion, the less prejudice and as a result violence. And the interesting thing is that the most important antidote to prejudice is travel. People who travel to different parts of the world and are in contact with different cultures and people usually have much less prejudice. Because they get to know different cultures and see that people organize themselves in different forms of society, mentality, and beliefs, and as a result, they respect these differences more. And this produces positive empathy. It's okay for us to sympathize with our own group in which we're a member, but sometimes we have to go out of this small circle and watch the world through other eyes. If societies do this, they produce the best antidote to violence, bigotry, and war. In December 1914, the sky lit up briefly, showing thousands of people a corner of a different world. We want to end this episode with this story. The reason is that sometimes we see that we're still in our trench, and we easily forget that the person who is a few hundred meters away from us is exactly like us. We shoot at each other and show violence against each other from our safe bastion, and we judge each other over and over again in different ways like social media. We let judgments, stereotypes, and the media guide us. And we judge those whom we have never even met. On Christmas Eve of 1914, an important event happened in the world, which was buried in news silence for a long time. On this Christmas night, the British soldiers from the trenches of their enemies, the Germans, heard a song called Silent Night, Holy Night, which is a sacred hymn that Westerners sing. They listen, and then the British soldiers sing the first Noel in response to the Germans. They cheer and sing O Christmas Tree in return. The hymns continue until finally, the soldiers of both countries sing the hymn Come All Ye Faithful in Latin. A Marine named Graham Williams later said in his memoirs that something truly extraordinary had happened. Two nations sang together in a real war. Yes, singing is a powerful thing, but the story didn't end there. The next morning, on Christmas Day, the bravest soldiers of the two countries came out of the trenches and went out of the barbed wire area, shook hands with the enemy soldiers, and arranged a football match with each other. Gifts were exchanged. The British gave chocolate and tea, and the Germans gave cigarettes and sausages, and later on in the next day, there were some matches between the soldiers of the two countries. They put a military hat instead of a goalpost. One game ended 3-2 in favor of the Germans, and another match 4-1 in favor of the British. There are many direct accounts of soldiers who even themselves can hardly believe that such moments happened at the height of the war. This is what we've been talking about in this entire episode. There's a lot of hatred against the enemy behind the war front and government departments and in the newsrooms, and that's why the generals tried not to inform this brilliant moment of human history in the media and tried to hide it from the world. Until 1981, when a documentary called Peace in No Man's Land was made and the story of the soldiers of both countries was broadcast in it. On that wonderful night, more than 100,000 soldiers laid down their weapons and forgot that the other is the enemy. If we had only one goal throughout this episode, that goal would be to change the meaning of the word realism. Realism isn't equal to despair, but it's equal to seeing the human with all their weaknesses and strengths. Remember that what seems foolish today may become absolute truth tomorrow. Believing in human good nature in today's world is like naivety, but we're sure that with this belief we can create a world where people show their best sides. The final question of this episode is, what's your definition of humanity? Of course, we aren't the angels that fell from the sky, but we aren't the devils also that the media and those in power want to show. We are human. Long live human, and long live humanity. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end of this episode.